It's 2 minutes past, so I think we're good to go. Welcome everybody to this AIJA Women Network session. For those of you who don't know, my name is Paula Fudakowska. I am AIJA's immediate past president, and I'm delighted to welcome all our speakers here today. The reason that I'm allowed to say anything during this session is partly because the AIJA Women Network was launched during my presidency last year, where we made a very public commitment to diversity and inclusion. The AIJA Women Network is very much the brainchild of Jennifer Maxwell, who is here today and who will say a few introductory words shortly. Also, Kadri Kallas, who is one of our moderators today, was very much involved in those very first discussions during our Rome Congress 2 years ago. So it's wonderful to have them both here today. Just to tell you a little bit about the AIJA Women Network. AIJA as an organisation has a very good gender balance amongst its members, and that's something that we certainly celebrate. It is also an organisation where all the members celebrate each other's successes. But I think those of us who talked about setting up this network felt very strongly that we should leverage off that existing network that we had to focus on the structural challenges in the legal profession that women may face when building their careers. The opening session of the AIJA Women Network was hosted at last year's virtual Congress, where we focused very much on identifying and counteracting bias. And since then, we've done a number of virtual sessions. The network is very inclusive and open to all our members, regardless of gender. And indeed, I think this was exhibited in one of the sessions where we talked about engaging men on the diversity and inclusion discussion. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of what we're all about. Once again, welcome to all of you and a warm thanks to all our panellists today. And I would now like to hand over to Jennifer Maxwell. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for this very important session. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the AIJA's Women Network and how you can become involved. So when we originally developed this idea, we had the grand plan of having all these in-person sessions, and it would be at all of our AIJA events or at key cities across the world. And obviously, that plan has been put on hold, at least until Zurich, when we're going to have our first in-person event, which we're very excited about. Now, what we thought might be a weakness has actually turned into a strength, because we found that these virtual seminars have allowed us to reach out to a broader community of people. It's allowed people to engage who may not otherwise have been involved in AIJA. For example, we've partnered with the IBA on some events. So something that seemed to have been a curse was actually a blessing in disguise. As Paula mentioned, we've had really good feedback so far and very high participation rates on our events, and we hope to continue that in the coming months and years. While we do address the institutional barriers that exist in our sector and in society more broadly, one of our goals for this network is always to provide ideas that you can implement in your own practice so that you can have real manageable change in your day-to-day work life. So I hope that we're achieving that. And I think in particular that this session you'll find some takeaways that will be particularly useful. Before I pass it on to Agatha to talk about today's session, I did want to do my usual plug to ask everyone to become involved. We have a steering committee of women and men who help us develop ideas for the sessions. Anyone is welcome to join that as well. We're looking for panelists, we're looking for session ideas. So if anything pops to mind, please get in touch with either Paula or I. Thank you very much, and we're over to Agatha for the key thing today.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you, Paula. Thank you all who have put so much effort for this session to be possible today. I'm privileged and honored to take part in today's webinar, and I hope it will be useful for all participants, not only women, but also men. Today's webinar will be a practical workshop. Our leading speaker today, Dr. Milana Hogan, will explain to you in more detail how it will be conducted. I have the pleasure to be one of the two moderators together with Kadri Kallas. So let me first say a few words about myself to those who do not know me. My name is Agatha Adamczyk. I am the national representative of Poland in AIJA since 2019. And currently I am also holding a position of the Vice President of the International Business Law Commission in AIJA. I have the privilege to participate in the AIJA Women Network initiatives and share my experience, which I have had until today on my professional path. In the year 2009, after almost 10 years of practice, both in law firms and as in-house counsel, I set up my own firm. It has developed ever since, and today it operates as a partnership under the name Agatha Adamczyk, Lieber and Associates. We are based in Krakow. I specialize in corporate law and international contracts and in commercial litigation. I assist international clients wishing to expand their business in Poland and Polish clients who do business on international scale. Now let me please present Dr. Milana Hogan, who is the Chief Legal Talent Officer at Sullivan and Cromwell LLP, where she oversees the firm's talent management initiatives. She is responsible for mentoring, training, and career development programs and performance evaluations. Milana is involved in diversity and inclusion initiatives, human resources, paralegal and analyst programs, and the firm's worldwide recruiting efforts. In addition to her work at Sullivan and Cromwell LLP, Dr. Hogan is the chair of the Professional Development Consortium. She also serves as a liaison to the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession, and she has been co-chair of the ABA's GRID project since its inception. Dr. Hogan recently published her first book, GRID, The Secret to Advancement, on the impact of grit and growth mindset on the success of women lawyers. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Brown University, and she holds a Doctor of Education from the University of Pennsylvania. Milana lives in New Canaan, Connecticut, with her husband and their 4 young children. Let me pass the floor to Kadri.
Thanks, Agatha. I am Kadri Kallas. I am the corporate partner and the co-head of M&A at the Baltic law firm TGS Baltic. I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia. And it's a great pleasure to host this webinar together with Agatha and our esteemed speakers. So let me introduce you to our other panelists. Let me introduce Anna Hiro, who is an associate at the international law firm Sullivan Cromwell at the London office. Anna is working in the firm's general practice group and has experience in finance, restructuring, project finance, mergers and acquisitions. She received her Bachelor of Laws degree from King's College London, University of London, and the Bachelor of Civil Laws from the University of Cambridge. Anna is UK qualified. And another panelist, we have Constanza Bossarelli, who's also an associate at the General Practice Group at international law firm Sullivan Cromwell. And she holds a law degree from Luis Guido Carli, Rome, and an LLM from the Fordham University School of Law from New York. Constanza is admitted to the New York bar, and she has been focusing on various practice areas, including mergers and acquisitions, capital markets, and securities laws. So now I would like to give floor to Milana. Milana, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here to speak about this topic that I think is incredibly important. And certainly I've seen it come into play many times in the 20+ years that I've been working in the legal profession. So I know firsthand how important it is. And today I want to share some evidence with you to help build the case for that. If you're not familiar with this topic, I want to talk about how important it is, and more specifically, how it connects to success for women in the law. So in terms of an agenda for today, what we will do is begin with a presentation on these topics. And again, I will share some evidence, both anecdotal and otherwise, some science around the importance of these traits. And then we will move into a discussion with all of our panelists where we'll talk about how these traits come into play in context. So when you are actually a practicing lawyer, how are these important and why? So we'll have a bit of a discussion among the panelists, and then we will give all of you a chance to really think about these concepts yourselves. And we have some interactive exercises at the end of the program where we'll give you a chance to think about how you might incorporate some of these traits once you've had a chance to learn about them and to hear some personal stories about them as well. So that's our plan until 10:30. And with that, I'm going to just jump right in and share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see this. And let's begin. So again, one of the reasons that this is important, and some of the introductions, of course, hinted at this, we have all just been through and are still living through today the effects of the pandemic and everything that that has brought to bear with it. And one of the things that is very clear after these many months is that it is a difficult environment to navigate. It's always a difficult environment in some respects to be in the legal field. It's always an intense environment that is challenging in many ways, but it's especially challenging now. So I don't know whether anybody relates to any of these bullet points on the screen here, but certainly when we look at the literature and we look at research around what people are experiencing over this past year, it is all of the things that are listed on this slide, right? It is depression, people are feeling lonely, people are feeling isolated. People may also be feeling as if they're in the same room with the same people, with their family, and they want nothing more than to have some alone time. So it ends up on both sides of the spectrum, really. And there has been a collision of home and work life in a way, since many of us have been working from our homes. And that introduces new challenges as well as fear and anxiety and helplessness and all of the things you see here. So I guess the main point on this is really just that these are always important traits, grit and growth mindset and resilience. These are always important, but perhaps never more so than right here in this exact moment. So these traits will be helpful as we are all trying to navigate through all of the many things that you're seeing on this slide. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about sort of where this research comes from. And it really emerges from the field of positive psychology. And if you're not familiar with positive psychology, I'll give you a quick summary, which is essentially that positive psychology is a field of study that looks to examine highly successful people who are thriving in some way, maybe professionally, but maybe also in their emotional lives, and seeks to understand what those people have in common with one another. So unlike traditional psychology, which tends to be focused on people who are suffering in some way, right, who have some sort of challenge, right, this is looking at people who are succeeding and saying, what can we learn from the habits of those highly successful people, right? And this is really where grit and growth mindset come from? It comes from that line of study. And there's a lot of research that has been done to try to understand specifically the concept of achievement and what contributes to that. So another way of saying that is what helps somebody be very successful? What are some of these things that come into play that make that journey towards whatever goal you're trying to accomplish easier or alternatively more difficult? And so I'm going to share 3 things with you today that make it easier to achieve success, right? And this is based on lots and lots of research, which I'm going to summarize many, many thousands of pages of research in just 2 minutes, so you'll have to bear with me. But this is helpful as we try to understand where grit and growth mindset fit into this picture, right? So one of the things that we understand that helps us succeed is our family, our culture, and the people that we surround ourselves with, our friends. This tends to be very predictive of success. So to give you an example, if I have a goal that I set out to achieve and my husband is not supportive of that goal and doesn't also want to help me achieve that goal, it's much more difficult to do it. And in my case, Agatha mentioned earlier that I have 4 children, and so that's especially true. If I'm going to go pursue a goal, I need my husband to be on board. He needs to help me take care of the children. He needs to work with me to find solutions that work for the entire family, right? So this is something that's very important. I think we all understand this anecdotally to be true. The same thing is true when you're a child, right? If you want to become a world-class ballerina, you likely need to have support from your parents. They need to drive you to practice. They need to pay for your lessons. They need to make sacrifices in pursuit of that goal. So whether or not your family and also your friends, right, the people you've chosen to surround yourself with, are in support of this goal has a huge impact on how successful you can be. I'm not sure if anyone recognizes these 2 young women here on the screen, but these are Venus and Serena Williams, incredibly successful tennis players. And I use them on this slide because they are a terrific example of 2 very successful women who relied heavily on family and friendship in order to achieve their goals, right? They come from a large family. It's not only the 2 of them. And everybody in that family really helped them achieve these goals. And they all made sacrifices so that that would be possible, right? So this is something that is very important. The second thing that tends to contribute to success is environment and circumstance. So another way of saying this is good luck, right? And this may sound funny, but is in fact very true. A lot of times when you look at successful people and you say to them, what has contributed to your achievements, they will say, being in the right place at the right time. You know, I got lucky because I had a certain break, or I had access to something that maybe I would not have otherwise had access to. Or I had a teacher that I found very inspiring, and maybe I wasn't on the right path, but that teacher moved me in a way, and suddenly I was very excited about the subject matter, or it motivated me to engage and to work harder, right? So a lot of success is just about good luck, right? And there's not that much we can do about this, so we're not going to spend too much more time on this slide, right? What you can do is make sure that when you get into a position and you get a lucky break, that you're ready to take advantage of it, right? But you can't always control whether and when you get that break. But that turns out to be very important for success. And the third bucket that I'm going to talk about, again, these are contributors to success and achievement, is, and maybe this sounds counterintuitive, the third indicator and predictor of success is how you respond when mistakes happen. And this may sound funny, but it turns out that highly successful people are very good at responding to mistakes. And mistakes, I think we all recognize on some level, in spite of our best efforts, are inevitable. And so if you are the kind of person who is able to be very nimble and quick in your response when a mistake happens, and to use that, more importantly, as an opportunity for learning, right? And to really take advantage of that moment to try to see what you could fix and adjust to prevent that going forward, instead of letting it make you feel awful about yourself or your own abilities. If you're able to do that really effectively, it's a tremendous predictor of success. So this third bucket is how you respond when things don't go well. And that's really where grit and growth mindset come into play, because they are two traits that help you in a moment when you've made a mistake, or maybe you haven't made a mistake, but something has gone wrong, something unexpected has occurred. Grit and growth mindset really help you navigate through that, right? And for that reason are terrific predictors of success. And we're going to get more into the science of how that works for women lawyers in just a moment. So when we try to understand, again, sort of going back to the field of positive psychology and looking at achievement and predictors of success, this is a neat little set of equations which comes from the work of Angela Duckworth, who, if you are not familiar with her, I would encourage you to Google her. She has some great TED Talks and some great talks on this issue. She's got some books. She's got lots of published research. And she's really come up with this concept of grit, right? Really comes from her work. So you can't talk about grit without talking about Angela Duckworth. And so she's got these two equations. And what these equations are trying to do is to help us understand the difference between a world-class performer, right? Somebody who's really at the top of their field, at the top of their game, and somebody who, you know, maybe develops some skills, but sort of peters out and has at some point in their career kind of a slow development. The curve kind of flattens and they don't continue to progress. So what is the difference between that top line, right? People achieving that world-class level of experts, and then the line below it, right? People who are okay, they're sort of improving, and then they kind of peter out, right? So what is the difference? So she tries to break this down into a set of equations, and she says, the formula is really talent, right? So you have some sort of natural ability. Then you apply effort, right? You try to improve that talent. You try to build upon that. And then you develop your skill. Once you develop that skill, instead of just relying on that skill going forward, you then need to double down on effort, right? Then once you've developed the skill and you're pretty good, you need to put in even more effort, right? And that's really what drives achievement. So it's effort times 2, right? You see effort appearing twice in there. Effort is incredibly important. And a lot of times what happens and what differentiates between the world-class expert, right, and the person who's pretty good but never really progresses beyond that level is that effort piece. It's whether you go back to the well and keep pushing. And so if we think about Serena Williams again, or Roger Federer, or any of the tennis greats that we could list, they are incredibly good at this. So they still, even at world-class expert levels, clearly, are putting forth tremendous effort to improve, right? You would think, I mean, who could tell Serena and Robert and you know, any of these people, Roger, who could tell them anything about how to improve, right? They're literally the best in the world, maybe the greatest of all time, and yet they still do that as a deliberate practice. They still go back and try to improve. And that's really critical to success. And it's really where grit and growth mindset come in also, because in addition to helping you, you know, with moments that are difficult, they also help you persist over the long haul. So they also help you stay in the game and apply that effort times 2, right? You sort of need them, or else it's difficult to dig in and to work as hard as it takes really to achieve those types of levels. So I've shared with you that they're important. I'm going to talk now more granularly about what they are, right? So mindsets are beliefs that we all have about ourselves and our most basic qualities. So if I ask you, I'm just going to ask you to think this in your mind, right? You don't have to raise your hand or indicate one way or the other, but just think about whether you're good at math. Are you somebody who is good at math or not good at math? So probably when I asked that question, you kind of had a quick reaction. You thought, oh, yep, I'm good at this, or no, maybe not so much, or maybe I'm average, right? You probably had some way of measuring, right? Probably through school, whether this was something you were good at or not. So that's a mindset. So you have a mindset about your math ability, and we all do have mindsets about different abilities. I may think I'm quite good at one thing and not very good at another, right? And Carol Dweck argues that there is a mindset spectrum, which you're looking at now on the screen. This is a visualization of the spectrum, right? And we all fall somewhere on this spectrum when it comes to our own abilities. So I asked the question about math, and if you had a strong fixed mindset, which is that red circle that you see, if you had a strong fixed mindset, what you would think is that you were good at math up to a certain level, whatever your own personal threshold was, your own personal ceiling, and you could perform up until that level and, you know, perhaps not too much beyond it. So for me, my ceiling was calculus, and I always loved math until I got to calculus, and then I felt once I arrived at that discipline that it no longer made sense to me. It was difficult, I didn't enjoy it, I struggled, and so I decided in my mind that that was my math ceiling. I sort of thought, okay, well, my train stops here. Now I don't really want to continue in this discipline because it's harder and I'm not enjoying it. So that's a good example of a fixed mindset. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a strong growth mindset, right, in that blue bubble, right, if you're operating in that way, when you have that same experience, you get to calculus, suddenly the discipline is hard for you. Suddenly it doesn't make sense. Now it's not easy to show up and get the A+ on the test, right? Now it's hard. If I had a strong growth mindset, what I would have said is, this is not a reflection on me and my abilities, and it's really interesting, and it means I'm going to have to work differently to continue to progress in this discipline, but it does not mean that I have a ceiling or that I'm not capable of progressing, right? So what it means is I have to figure out why I'm struggling in this moment, and I have to figure out how to get around that. So it's not a ceiling now, it's not a ceiling, I'm not up against a ceiling. Now it's just an obstacle, and I have to figure out how to get around it, right? So that's sort of the concept of mindset. You'll see a line here in the middle, which is female lawyers. So as part of the ABA research that I've done in connection with the GRIT project, we looked at many women lawyers, in this case, more than 5,000. And what we asked them to do was take this mindset test to sort of figure out where they fall on the spectrum. And it turns out that most women lawyers are kind of right in the middle, right? Which means that when they are encountering barriers of some kind that are challenging in some way, a lot of them are interpreting that as specific to their own abilities. So the thought in that moment may be, I'm not sure that I have what it takes to be really successful, right? I'm not sure. If something isn't going well, I might think it has something to do with me and what I'm doing right or wrong, or what I'm capable of, right? So that's often what's happening in that moment. We're going to talk about growth mindset moments as we get further into the program. We're going to hear from our panelists on some of those, right? So that's the idea of mindset. There is tons of mindset science to suggest that if you have, again, I'll go back to this slide, if you have that growth mindset orientation, right, where you don't interpret challenges as specific to your ability and you believe very firmly in the power of effort, right, to help you make great accomplishments and strides, then you are much more likely to succeed, right? You're more likely to be successful in school. You see some little children there. You're more likely to be successful in intense graduate programs. You're more likely to be successful really at all stages of your life. And it's not specific to professional circumstances, right? It's really across the board, right? And I'm a parent, and I think about this with my children all the time, making sure that when they don't do well on the test, they don't interpret that as I'm not smart. They interpret it as, oh, I need to work differently, right? This didn't work out. Maybe I need to look at how I prepared, right? That's what they need to look at. Was it hard enough? Was it the right preparation? Did the preparation work? And so on, right? Lots of science around this. Shifting to grit, grit is a little bit different. So mindset is sort of a belief that you have about yourself, right? And that you carry with you. And grit is more action oriented. So grit is really whether or not you're willing to dig in and to persist in pursuit of a goal over the long haul, right? So grit is defined as passion and perseverance for long-term goals, right? So it's important that they be long-term goals. So it's not just, I'm going to study all night for the test so I get an A. That's not grit. That's a short burst of effort, right? Grit is, I'm going to spend the next 10, 11, 20, 30 years really trying to be the best lawyer I can be, right? That would be sort of a gritty goal, right? I'm going to really invest in this, right? I want it, and I want it because I care about it, because I'm passionate about it, because this brings me some sort of joy. So grit is not just hard work. That's very important. It must contain the passion piece. So a long-term goal, passion, and persistence, right? This effort times 2, right? That's where grit comes in. And again, I know I've said this, but I want to repeat because I think it's so important that I would never tell a group of women lawyers who is often, you know, literally among the most hardworking people in the world I've ever encountered, right? Women lawyers work incredibly hard. So I would never say the secret to success is hard work or just effort, right? I think that's something women lawyers do incredibly well. It has to be married with that passion piece, because otherwise it feels miserable. If you're putting in effort and you're not enjoying it, then you're likely to burn out, right? You're likely to say, no, thank you. This is not fun. It's not a fun experience for anyone. So when we look at grit scores and some gender differences, again, this is a study that actually looks at close to 11,000 people, right? So there's many people in this study. We see that women tend to have the edge when it comes to grit, which is really just to say that if you're looking across levels, so the 1 on the bottom is the bottom 10%, the 2 is the next 10%, the 3 is the third 10%, right? If you're looking at that, you can see that the women just slightly have the edge. They tend to be on balance a little bit grittier. The reverse is true for mindset, right? Men tend to be more growth mindset oriented, right? And women less so. You saw they were kind of in the middle, right? In the earlier slide. So they tend to have the edge when it comes to grit. Just like mindset, tons of science that supports this. And the important takeaway from this science, I won't get into all of these studies, there's so many, you can read about them. But it's a better predictor of who succeeds than a lot of things that we tend to overvalue in the legal profession. For example, how smart you are, right? A lot of places are very concerned with where did you go to law school and how prestigious is that? And what was your grade? And, you know, how did you perform, right? A lot of places are very concerned with that. Turns out those things are not a great predictor of success. What is a great predictor of success is how gritty you are and how growth mindset oriented you are. So it's something that I think as a profession we need to be more focused on than we tend to be. So when you get into the study of lawyers, and I really want to make this very specific, we did a big study with the ABA to look at to what extent do grit as a standalone measure and growth mindset predict success, right? So to do that, we used a mixed methods approach, which is to say that we did a survey. So everybody filled out a survey. They took the grit test, they took the growth mindset test, right? There's tests that you can take to measure those traits. And then we looked at them as compared to various measures of success in the practice of law. And we were looking at all kinds of practitioners, solo practitioners, people in very small firms, people working in-house, government, judges, and then giant law firms, right? All the way up to the law firms that have literally thousands of lawyers. And we looked at, does this matter? And how does it matter, right? So in addition to that survey, we also had interviews with people, which is kind of what we're going to do in the next section, right? Which is to talk to people about how they're using these traits. Are they using these traits? When they use them, does it help? Does it matter, right? So that's what we were looking at. And what we learned as a result of this study is that there is a statistically significant link between grit mindset and measures of success in all of the domains that I mentioned, right? So it doesn't matter how you're practicing, right? Whether you're a solo practitioner or working in the largest firm that there is, it matters in all of those domains, right? We also learned that lawyers are pretty gritty, but for women in particular, that growth mindset piece is not where I think it ultimately should be, right? And that's, that is not a judgment. It's just an opportunity, again, for improvement. Because if we're operating in this way where we just assume if something's challenging that it's some default, some personal default, we're not good enough in some way, we're falling short in some way, it can be really demotivating, and it can cause a lot of people to opt out of the profession entirely, to say, I'm not going to do this. If I'm not going to be able to succeed, then I don't want to do this, right? So lots of interesting findings. Couple specific findings that I want to share before we get into the group conversation. So one finding is that grit is highly correlated, right, to a number of factors, but one of those is billable hours. So the grittier you are, right, the higher you test on that grit scale, the more likely you are to work more hours. And while that certainly may be attractive from the perspective of the firm, of course, firms would like to have lawyers who are very busy and engaged. I think it is also an indicator of engagement in the work, right? So people who were gritty tend to be sought out for the plum assignments, right? For the very important assignments, because they really were passionate about what they were doing. They were putting forth their best effort every time, right? So they tended to get the better work. And when they got the better work, they tended to develop their skills more quickly as a result of that, right? Because those tend to be the assignments where, you know, they're complicated and they're not easy. And you can't just put one foot in front of the other. You have to think outside of the box. You have to solve a problem that the client can't solve on their own, right? That's why they've hired you, and you have to help troubleshoot, and all the unexpected things happen, and it's a brand new thing, and maybe there's no precedent, right? So all of these are really good developmental opportunities, and that's really the second bullet. So it's grit is related to the quality of the work that a lawyer tends to receive. So the grittier you are, the more likely you are to get those really good assignments, right? Grit is also related to performance evaluation. So many firms here, certainly in the US and I think around the world, evaluate their lawyers on an annual or biannual basis, and they give you a review and they tell you you're doing great in this area, but you need to focus on this, right? So the grittier individuals tend to get higher ratings in the performance evaluation process, right? So that's compelling because you could look at the performance evaluation process and say, no performance evaluation process is perfect, of course, right? But it nevertheless does have some link to how you are perceived within the firm, right? So it's important in that way, and certainly reflective of people's experience to some degree, right? Grit also influences whether somebody who is working in-house is viewed as a strategic partner. And I thought this finding was particularly interesting. So for lawyers who are working within corporations, a lot of times lawyers measured their own success by how they were treated internally. Like did the CEO, for example, view them as somebody who needed to be in the room when important decisions were made? Or did the CEO view them as somebody who could be told or brought in after the fact and then asked to execute? So we've made this big important strategic decision about the company, and now we're going to call in the lawyers and they're going to do the things that the lawyers do, right? Or do we need the lawyer in the room with us when we are even beginning the conversation, from the outset of the conversation? So that's what it was measuring, is literally the point at which you were brought into the conversation. So the grittier people are brought into the discussion, invited in, right? People are afraid to make a move without you in the room, right? So that's the link there. And then looking at mindset, it is strongly related to compensation. So what that means is the more growth mindset oriented you are, the more you tend to earn relative to your peers. So within your own organization, right? So not as a pure measure, right? Because there's different levels of compensation depending on where you work, right? But relative to your peers, you tend to be a higher earner if you're growth mindset oriented. And then within organizations, mindset predicts seniority, which is another way of saying, as you climb up that organizational chart, right? As you step up, you tend to be more growth mindset oriented. So the people who are making it to the top are relying to some extent on growth mindset orientation, right? That belief that when they are hitting hurdles or things are not going well, again, it's not specific to some default, right, that they have or don't have, right? So that's a lot of information. I realize I've talked for quite a bit here. And now I want to move into the panel discussion, which again, I think is really important because those concepts are interesting, but not nearly as interesting, I think, as how we apply this in our own practices, right? So how can you take these traits and our understanding of them and really bring them to bear? So I have some questions for the panelists just to start the discussion. And of course, if anyone wants to ask questions, we'd love to hear those as well. So this question is really a question for everybody in the group. And let me just say a word about why we've chosen these panelists. And in addition to all the fantastic accomplishments that you heard about each of them earlier, we wanted to have a representative panel of people at different stages of their career because these things are experienced differently at different stages, right? When you were just beginning your career, how you bring grit and growth mindset to bear is different than it is as you progress, right, along that timeline, and they're all equally important. And no matter where you are as an audience member, right, listening to this discussion, no matter where you fall on that spectrum, it's incredibly important to understand as much as you can about all of those different perspectives, right? If you're a leader, you may be far removed from the moment where you were a junior associate or more junior in your career. You may forget what that was like. I think we all have a little amnesia. Certainly I do. I'm like, why can't people just figure this out? And then I forget what it was like when I had no idea how to do any of these things. And it was incredibly stressful, right? And so it's really helpful to hear that perspective because it makes you a better leader, right? And if you're more junior, it's helpful because you can understand, yes, I relate to this, right? And here are some of the ways that people in my same position have navigated through. So that's sort of our idea with these particular panelists, to whom I'm extremely grateful for joining and sharing your views. And of course, I get to work with two of them, and I'm very, very lucky for that as well. So I know a bit about the environment that they're working in as well. So I'll have some targeted questions about that in a moment. So let's get to the questions and hear from the panelists. The first question, this is really for everybody, but I'd love if each of you could take a moment and share with us a time when you relied on grit to help you navigate through a difficult career moment. When was a time when that really came into play, where you had to use that and it helped you in some way? Or alternatively, is there a moment in your career when you reflect back where you didn't use grit or that type of thinking, right, and it didn't work out well, right? An opportunity where a missed opportunity would be another way to say that. So let me go first to Agatha, if that's okay with you. We'll have you kick us off with that question.
Thank you very much. I decided to tell a very personal story about the biggest challenge that I have come across in my professional life. It was in the year 2009 and 8 and 9, so during the financial crisis. I was a partner in a medium-sized law firm. We were 7 partners, about 30 associates, with offices in Krakow and in Warsaw. And me and another partner, together with about 6 associates, we were assigned to work for a major client of the firm. It was a capital group of about 18 companies in Poland and abroad. And when the Lehman Brothers Bank went bankrupt and the financial crisis began, the client immediately started thinking about how they could cut costs. And what they did is they decided to terminate the agreement with our firm. And they offered us jobs as in-house lawyers, which we did not accept because we did not want to leave the firm and we did not want to become employees. So as of January 1st of 2009, I was officially a partner with no client and no work. And I was a leader with a team which did not have work. It was the most difficult experience in my professional life. I would come to the office and I literally had no work. I would open my mailbox, there were no mails. I would open my spam folder, which was full, but no assignments there. I was sitting in my office, watching my colleagues running around busy, having meetings with the clients, receiving mail from the courts, running to the court hearings, talking on the phone. And I had no calls and I had no meetings and I never received any mail from the court. So at some point I decided that I need to establish an Agatha rescue plan and undertake some actions to recover from that very difficult situation. And what I did was I concentrated on very concrete actions. I would come to the office every day, 9 a.m. sharp, wearing a suit, high heels, full makeup, sitting at the computer. I started writing articles on legal topics. They were subsequently published in legal magazines. I started again learning Spanish. So you can imagine me sitting at the desk and doing Spanish exercises. all the verbs, all the tenses, everything that I could. I would attend every networking event possible, every marketing course. And after 7 months, I was invited to a conference in Almeria in Spain, and I gave a speech in Spanish. And during the summer, a former client of mine contacted me and they asked me for assistance because they had a plan and an intention to set a factory close to Krakow. So only in September, so after 9 months, I recovered my work and I started working normally. And I have to say that it was a very, very difficult period for me. But and it was extremely difficult to keep up the morale and to believe that it will change because I did not receive any support from the firm. And I really had to face with all these, setbacks and thoughts about myself, not receiving work. I thought that I was a bad lawyer. I was an incompetent person, and keeping up with that and believing that there is a sense coming into the office every day, that was a big challenge for me. And I feel proud, and I always say to my junior associates that even if they have difficult periods and if they fail, they should never lose belief in their abilities, because they will always recover if they are consequent and make an effort.
Thank you. That's such an incredible story. I can imagine how terrifying that must have been, and certainly yes. You could imagine that on some level. And I think this is really important about growth mindset. Is on some level it may feel like the rational decision is hey, I should just throw in the towel. This is not going well. I don't have any work. Maybe it's smart for me to just acknowledge that I should move on. And thank God that you didn't, right? Because now you're sitting here today and it's such a different outcome. But I think that's something we have to remember, that in the moment, sometimes it can feel as if the rational choice is in fact the opting out. And so that's really in that moment when we're so terrified that we have to go back and say, nope, this is not about me. It's not about, what I can or can't accomplish. It's a circumstance, and I just have to figure out how to get through it, right? I have to approach this from whatever angle makes sense. Maybe I'll have to try 10, right? But that's just so critical, and it would just be such a shame if there was a different outcome. So I love that. I love that story. Kadri, let's go to you next.
Yes. I think when I look at my career so far, for me, the most crucial moments have probably been related to becoming a partner or being on the verge of partnership. I mean, naturally, it's because being a partner is the pinnacle of the private practice. So this is obviously something that at least most of us strive for. And in my previous firm, I mean, I was very grateful for we had amazing team. There were some issues in the management I didn't quite like, but I somehow, it was a very safe environment, and it seemed like this I was going from strength to strength in my career, and up until the partnership. But then that kind of stalled for a little while for different reasons. And I think at one point I started to think that maybe I don't need the partnership. So maybe it was a nice nice practice, nice clients, and maybe it's very comfortable to work that way. But then at one point I just remembered that this is what I wanted to do. I want to be a partner. I want to shape my practice the way, and I want to practice law the way I deem fit. And at that point, I knew that I had to leave that firm, and I joined another one and became a partner straight away. And at the moment, I have so much to say about how the firm is run. So I'm glad I made that leap, and I didn't stay in my comfort zone because of nice plum big assignments, but just to because I knew I wanted to shape my own practice.
Yeah, another fantastic story, and so many important connections to grit and to that story, like remembering what your passion was. I actually am passionate about being a partner, and I'm going to pursue this. And also, you know, one of the things that happens, I think, sometimes where grit is helpful is we tend to imagine, this is just humans in general, one of the things that happens in our brains is that we take whatever we're experiencing at that moment and we assume it's always going to be like that. We're like, I can't do this anymore, instead of saying this is a moment in time, and then you making the wise adjustment to get into a place where you could get to where you wanted to get, right? Which is, to make that move is scary, but also within your control. And I think that's so incredibly important as we think about these concepts. Costanza, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Milana. And obviously my the experience that I would talk about is a bit different. By way of background, I'm a fifth-year associate at S&C, so it's more of a work-related, like work experience anecdotes. I was just a second-year associate when this happened. I was working on a big M&A deal, which was incredibly complicated in terms of things that needed to be prepared before closing, and things needed to be in place, number of parties that needed to be coordinated. And our client on this deal needed some help coordinating all the work streams and making sure that things would happen in time. And the timeline was very, very, very tight. So they asked for some help from us, and it was decided that I would go on a weekly basis for a few days to their headquarters in another country. So basically every week I was spending a few days in the London office of S&C and some days at the company's headquarters to meet with the different teams, meet with other advisors, coordinate basically all the pre-closing work streams. And it was extremely challenging for me. I was still very junior. I was having all of a sudden all this client exposure because I was basically working with the clients, like different teams at a very direct level every day, all the time. The workload was significant. I would go back to my hotel room in the evening and work until late, and then wake up early in the morning because we had to turn documents and negotiate with the counterparty that was in another country. And also in terms of responsibilities, it was very different from any experience that I had before, because all of a sudden I was responsible for all these things, and I was very scared that if I had just missed, one piece of the puzzle, if I just let something slip, then the deal wouldn't close and it would be my fault. But on the other hand, so it was extremely challenging, extremely tiring, but I knew that I wanted to do my work well. And so even being very scared, even having uncertainty as to how to do it and what to do, I realized that I needed to just establish the good mindset, take control of the situation, stay positive about it, be extremely disciplined in scheduling my days, making sure that I would have time to do everything, making a clear plan, but also be ready for unforeseen issues that come up all the time, as everyone working in our profession knows very well. And I just realized that I had to put all my efforts into it. I guess I stopped freaking out about the situation and just focused on getting it done. And well, I don't know, everything went fine. It was incredibly tiring and challenging, but 2 months later, the deal closed. The client was very happy. Everybody was really happy. And now when I look back at this experience, I realize it's one of the moments that I grew most in my career so far, probably, because it was such a big difference compared to what I was doing before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, so many of these things are, it's in that moment where we do feel some sort of panic and have to talk ourselves into just, keep in it, stay in it, stay focused. You can do this. It's like you have to be your own cheerleader, I think, in a lot of moments. And that's where grit and growth mindset are so important, because I think in a moment like that, where you do feel like, hey, maybe objectively this task is too much for any one person, or too much for my skill level, or whatever, and just being able to say to yourself, yes, I can do this, and I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to bet on my own ability to navigate through this through effort and discipline, and one foot in front of the other. And that's incredibly important. But I think important too, because it highlights what we said earlier, which is, the experience of this at a more junior level, it can be very terrifying. And so it's important, as leaders of teams, to remember what that's like, and to do what you can to encourage that, even if it's just saying, you've got this, pulling someone aside and saying, I remember what this was like when I was in this experience, and I felt the same way, right? I didn't think I had this under control either. Kind of nobody does. It's impossible to, right? Because the math doesn't work. And just sort of reassuring people that this is, in many ways, for most of us, a shared experience. I think that's really important. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Milana. My sort of experience that I will share is relatively similar to Constanza's, in that I was also a second-year associate at the time, and it also involved a transaction that happened over a period of months and was sort of quite complicated and involved quite a lot of hard work. So it was a special situations transaction, and we had 3 clients for it. They were all new clients of the firm, and it was a really complicated transaction. Circumstances were just changing at a really quick pace. And what was particularly challenging for me was that my role in the transaction was really multidisciplinary. I was working both on the debt and the equity sides of the transaction, and I was actually running the equity side, even though I was still relatively junior at the time, and most of my experience until then had been on the debt side. So that was actually quite terrifying for me at times. And I really did have to believe in myself and think about all the preparation that I needed to do. I had to very quickly read into lots of the different situations that might be applicable, what the different concerns or pitfalls that I needed to be aware of to advise on the clients were, in order to address their concerns and make sure that they achieved their goals. And another challenge for me in this transaction was that there were actually many all parties calls where I would directly negotiate key terms on the equity side against a partner of the law firm acting for the other side, whilst our colleagues and clients were on the line, where I really didn't want to make a mistake. But I stood my ground against him. And I even had to remind myself at times that, the partner that I was working with had the confidence in me to let me take on that responsibility. And that helped me have more confidence in myself and push myself to get it done. And as a whole, the transaction, was very stressful for me. I had to put in lots of hard work, involved quite a lot of resilience, and trying to remind myself to just not panic, keep going, put in the work, be diligent and gritty. And now I actually remember it with a great sense of personal achievement, not only in having been able to overcome the many challenges that I faced at the time, but also because ultimately we reached a successful outcome for the clients, and they were very pleased with the work and subsequently even brought in repeat business, and some of them still do to this day.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, so many important grit takeaways in connection with that. I mean, we really, it is that going back to the well time and again. And I like very much what you said about remembering that somebody gave you this task because they thought you could do it. And certainly, it would be irresponsible for a partner to give somebody a task that they didn't think would go well. And so sometimes you just have to remind yourself of that. Certainly, we all want a good outcome. The partner does not want an embarrassing situation, so they wouldn't have assigned that to you, right, if they had any real doubt that you could do it. And so sometimes it's just reminding yourself that. And again, trusting your ability to navigate through. So those are four really excellent and I think, illustrative grit examples. I want to talk very briefly about mindset. So we just have two quick questions, and we're going to give you all a chance to think about these in context. We've got some scenarios that you'll be able to discuss in breakout rooms. So these are two quick questions. I'm going to go next to Kadri and Agatha and ask you each to quickly weigh in on this topic. But moving to this concept of mindset, which are, they're kind of interrelated. You can tell as we're discussing these stories. You can't purely separate them. But if we focus on mindset for a bit, I think one of the things that often happens for many of us, certainly I've been guilty of this in my own career, is I look up to people that I admire, to people who are very successful, and I assume that it all came easily to them. I'm like, they just look like always in control. They seem so calm and collected. They always seem to know the answer. They never get flustered, so they must be different than me in some way, right? They just must be better, more highly skilled, all of this, right? And I think we've all sort of done that. You look above you and you think, no, those people are just superstars, right? They're just special, right? And amazing. And so I think it's important as part of this research, and certainly we've found, to make this sticky, it's important that we all tell the real story of success, which is that, we have all hit stumbling blocks along the way and have doubted ourselves. And it's not that you get to some magic point, or at least it's not my experience, that you get to a point and then suddenly you're like, I'm never going to doubt myself again. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't have moments like that at any level of leadership. And maybe there's more opportunity to doubt yourself even as you get higher up the chart, right? And you're sort of more responsible, right? There's more people that depend on you and so on. So would love to hear from Kadri and Agatha. Can you confirm that? Have there been moments where you doubted yourselves? And are there even moments today where you still doubt yourself? And either of you could go first, whoever wants to jump in.
Okay, I can go first, of course. I mean, it's absolutely, on a daily basis, you are facing it, some new problem, and then you start solving and unraveling it. But in relation to that, I think which helped me to develop or get control of this this kind of growth mindset was I had a partner when I was a very junior lawyer. I had a partner who absolutely refused associate when he worked on a matter with you. He refused to see you before you tried to give a solution. I mean, I know it sounds very basic advice, but he always, when you're overloaded with the different work, and then you come across his assignment and you say, I don't know where to start. And then I made this kind of mistake of going once or twice to him with like, I don't know what to do. And he said, like, don't, he said, don't come with a problem, come with a solution. And even if you can't find a solution, but show me that you have exhausted all the resources that are at your disposal. And I think it was a great piece of advice from the very early career. And I've actually I've practiced the same thing with my associates. I think it's excellent way, and I practice it the same way today. I mean, if there's a new foreign concept that comes to my mind, I'm not just going to say I don't know anything about it and throw it back to the other side's lawyer. But it's you have to exhaust all the resources you have to come to a conclusion or solution.
Absolutely.
Yes, I may only echo what Kadri has just said, and at times I also experience that feeling that maybe I'm not good enough, but it's easy because today the competition is very strong. The law firms have outstanding achievements. The technology makes things even more spectacular, and the social media allow for creating images which are overwhelming and impressive. So this is one point. The second point is that the transactions have become very complicated and the legal issues have become tremendously complicated. So as a small firm, which we are, we cannot face all the problems because we are too small. And I often feel that the larger firms, they can really offer better services. But well, I think that each of us has its place, his or her place on the market. And if you do the job well, you do just the job that you accept. No one can force you to accept the job that you don't want to take or you are not able to take. Just do the job the best you can.
Yeah, it's great advice and such a good reminder that, you know, as the world is becoming increasingly complex. And so I think it's probably good advice for us all to develop a certain amount of comfort with uncertainty, because there's a lot of it. And if we panic every time we feel like we don't know the answer or question, you know, our worth or our ability, it will be a miserable road ahead, right? I think just recognizing, hey, this is a feeling that is going to come up a lot, and I'm just going to have to figure out how best to navigate through, to keep that moving positively to get to the best solution, right? But I don't have to always know the answer, and that's no sort of test or measure of my capabilities, really. So flipping the coin a little bit to Anna and Costanza, just as members of teams that are still being led by partners and perhaps more senior lawyers at this point, you know, how important is it to you that you work in an environment where it is made clear that if you make a mistake, it's not career ending, right? To be led by leaders who understand that mistakes are, in fact, while not ideal, and of course we'd love not to make them, nevertheless, you know, opportunities for learning. How important is it to be in an environment where that feels safe and you feel like I can tell you about this and you're going to help me learn from this and I'm not going to be immediately ushered out? How important has that been to your career? And either of you, again, could go first.
Why don't I go first this time? Thanks, Milana. I mean, personally, I've always viewed mistakes as a learning opportunity. But when you start a career as a professional advisor, there's always added external pressure that you shouldn't be making any mistakes in your work. You know, that's not what clients come to you for. And I've had the pleasure at SNC of working with many team leaders who are growth mindset oriented. And even from the early stages of my career, there's this one occasion that I remember vividly when I was a trainee, I think in my first year as a trainee, and realized I had made a mistake in respect of something. And I immediately went to tell my supervisor. And I was so stressed, sort of waiting to hear what her reaction was going to be. And I was shocked at how calm she was about it and how immediately she just turned her mind to trying to talk to me and finding a solution. And I think that occasion in particular, although there have been many others, but because it was at such an early stage in my career, it had a very beneficial impact in my career development, because it reinforced the view that once a mistake has been made, the most important thing to do is just take stock of where you are and focus on addressing the problem, addressing the situation, and then using it as a learning opportunity going forward, both in terms of, you know, potential steps to take in future to avoid mistakes like that happening, and also as possible solutions that you can look to implement in order to address any other mistakes. And I think the ability to reframe one's mindset to view mistakes as a learning opportunity is really helpful in reducing a lot of the stress that, you know, is inherent in our profession, especially for people at the early stages in their career. And as I progress through my career and become more senior, when I now lead trainees or junior associates in transactions, it's always something that I try to instill in them also, because I found it so beneficial as I've been progressing through my career.
Thank you. I agree with all of that. It's so important to do it early on. I think to learn that muscle memory is key. Costanza.
No, I agree 100% with what Anna said, and I am lucky enough to have shared the same experience here at SNC. I mean, when I started, in addition to that, all the pressure that obviously you feel in yourself, because it's a job where you think you're not expected to make mistakes. In addition to that, I don't know, SNC was my first job. I was Italian who had studied mainly in Italy, in, you know, working in a place where almost everyone is a native English speaker, so I was very scared about making mistakes, and I was extremely surprised when it happened, because obviously it happens. This is it's a profession where mistakes happen. My leaders from the very beginning, whenever mistakes would happen, would react in a very, very calm way, thinking immediately about the solution, thinking about how to fix it, and without, you know, taking this as an excuse to blame it on anyone, whether it was me or someone else, without being disrespectful. So I think I've learned that mistakes are just an opportunity. Of course, we want to try to avoid making mistakes, but if they happen, it's an opportunity to learn, to develop our ability in solving issues, and also keeping self-control. And as Anna said, like, I'm also really striving to keep the same self-control when, you know, now that I'm a bit further in my career, my juniors make a mistake. I was really fascinated by the fact that my leaders were so calm, and that's what I try to do as well. Not blame it on anyone, just try to resolve the issue together.
Yeah, and I love that, and I think it makes such an important point, which is, you know, if you think about, you know, that we want to reinforce this both in ourselves, but also in the people working for us. If we don't react that way, if we react as if a mistake is, you know, some personal failing of the person who's made the mistake, then we're reinforcing what they may also be believing about themselves, that they don't have what it takes. So, you know, you have to react with a growth mindset orientation when others around you are making mistakes as well. So not just you, but everybody around you. That helps reinforce that culture. So we promised some breakout rooms. I'd like to go to that piece now. I understand that all participants were emailed some scenarios. And so we will likely go into breakout rooms until about 10:25. So you'll have about 12 minutes in those rooms. We have two different scenarios, and just in the interest of time, I think maybe it's best if you pick one. And one of them is about a billing credit dispute. So somebody who's trying to get some credit for some work that they brought in and is struggling in that situation. And then the other one is about this pandemic experience and being alone and really trying to juggle the intersection of work and home, and that's very difficult. And that one's the first one, and then the billing credit dispute is the second one. So maybe as a group you can pick which one you'd like to talk about and then read it. It will take you 2 seconds if you haven't read it already. Don't worry, it's very, very short. And then start working your way through the discussion questions. The goal of this exercise, again, is you've heard from us, you've heard the science. Now we want you to think about how would you navigate through this situation if you're thinking about the importance of some of these traits. So if we can go into the breakout sessions, that would be terrific. I'll leave it to the organizers to show how to do that. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So I think it looks like we're gonna not be able to do the breakout rooms. That's no problem. Instead, maybe we will do a conversation around the scenarios ourselves. And just in the interest of time, I think one that will be easy to do is the endless summer scenario, because I think that's something that we all felt. So in this scenario, I'll just give a quick summary for those who have not had a chance to read this, and then maybe we can talk about it as the panelists, and certainly others from the audience are welcome to weigh in. We'd love to hear from you guys as well. So in the endless summer scenario, essentially what happens is you are at home, and you've been at home for a long time, and in this scenario, let's imagine that you have people around you who are very high risk, and so as a result of that, you have been basically isolating yourself pretty much completely, not seeing family members, not leaving. So you are experiencing those feelings of claustrophobia and, you know, perhaps isolation and loneliness. And so you've been experiencing that, and then you have this boss who is very eager to do work and keeps wanting to have conversations at all hours of the night. And in this moment, you've just sat down, you have your snack, and you're about to watch your movie, and you're just really looking forward to some downtime. You've been working so hard, and then your boss reaches out to you and wants to have a call, sort of in the middle of this moment of relaxation. And that is, really difficult, right? Because this is just, you were just so looking forward to this. And so what do you do in that moment, right? What would you do? And how would you think about communicating with your boss that you do need some time off, right? So how would you sort of do that? So maybe we can open it up to the panelists. Certainly, I'm happy to share my views because I've experienced this multiple times. And I think the pandemic made that harder because people knew, especially if you were in a country where everyone was quarantining, that you were at home. I mean, it's in theory, when we're all traveling about, nobody knows where you are. You can be out and about. And so people would, perhaps be more hesitant to bother you than they would be if they know exactly where you are, that you must be at home and everybody's at home. And so certainly I've experienced that. Any of the panelists, have any of you experienced that? Did you have a situation where you just felt, in one way, even if not this specific scenario, that these things were sort of colliding, work and home, and that's, pronounced certainly in this past period of time? Have any of you experienced that, and how did you try to navigate through that?
If I may comment on that, yes, I did. I have my clients during the pandemic. They have accustomed to the fact that they may contact me at all times, whether it will be the evening or the weekend, and also using different tools. So what's difficult for me now is that I receive not only emails or phone calls, but also WhatsApps, or some of my clients send me messages on LinkedIn. And since these are the tools for instant messaging, they obviously expect me to respond within minutes, which is very stressful. And the other downside of it is that sometimes they send me the materials, the documents, the information necessary for the case, and I don't know whether they send them to me on WhatsApp or maybe in the WhatsApp group or individual message. So it is a very difficult situation. First thing which I do is I request that they send me the information through one channel, so that I don't respond to messages. I just, even if I see a message on WhatsApp or LinkedIn, what I do is I send an email to this client saying that I received your message, and I continue this exchange via email because it helps me navigate. It helps me keep control keep track of the exchange of all the information. The other thing is that I use autoresponders. So when I'm away, and there are days that I am away, I use the autoresponder, and I just don't, if I cannot, I don't open the mailbox. I respond as quickly as possible. I return to work and I respond then. I don't respond at night. I don't respond on Sunday.
Yeah, I like that approach. I like that approach for sure. Does anyone else have strategies that they've used to try to carve out some time to unwind, which I think is so important. It's hard. You can't go at 100% all the time. Your mind and body needs a chance to relax and recharge. It's so important. You can't keep up that level of effort it takes if you're not, getting regular breaks, for sure. Anyone else have strategies that they've used to try to deal with a situation like that?
Of course, it depends. And looking at this scenario, this example, it's very peculiar. It's a Sunday night, 8 p.m. when the Assistant General Counsel receives the email, the request to do a Zoom call. It always depends. I guess if it is a really, really urgent matter, then you need to find a way to be present and do it, and then you try to do it in the most efficient possible way. But otherwise, I think in certain situations when it's if it's not really necessary, and it's not really necessary, and you can I don't know, there were ways even during COVID to say, you have a personal commitment, or give a generic but firm response, and propose another time, supposed to do it immediately, as soon as possible the next morning. So I think it's really a matter of judgment. At least how I would respond.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in any of these scenarios, you wouldn't have the full fact pattern. I think it depends on, you need to know more about who this person is and what the nature of the work is. And, so in each case, of course, there's a political context that you need to consider about, what is the best response. But I think it can feel, disheartening in a moment like that, as if you don't have any options, and in fact you do, right? And so it's partly just reminding yourself, and we talked earlier about sometimes in these situations it feels like this is the way it's always going to be, and certainly I felt that way, and I've done the math where I think I can't possibly have 4 kids being homeschooled and still be responsive and still manage all the things in my life that need to be managed. And then you just have to, remind yourself that you are playing the long game, that there are going to be bumps along the road, and just sort of stepping back and looking at it from 10,000 feet sometimes can be very helpful too. This is a tricky situation. And, the same thing is true of the second scenario, which I belatedly saw that somebody wanted to start with. So I'm so sorry I would have chosen that one instead had I seen that earlier. But that's another one. We can talk about that for a second, which is really, about how do you navigate if you've sort of earned this work and brought it into the firm, right? This is this scenario about billing credit. If you really, if you've brought this thing and you've worked so hard and you're trying to get to partnership level, you want to become an equity partner, and nobody's giving you that credit. And what do you do? And I think, again, there are no easy answers for that scenario, but it's about sort of coming back to that moment of not just accepting that it isn't possible, or that you're not capable of navigating through that, or sort of letting that helplessness set in, because that tends to be really, really challenging to get out of, and instead sort of moving ahead with it. One of the things that is very likely to happen, when we are in stressful situations, is called catastrophizing, which is that you sort of take an experience and then you worry about what could happen, and you allow yourself to play that out in your mind all the way to the worst possible scenario. So my catastrophizing would be, I was not able to fully pay attention on that call because my kids were shouting and they were fighting and somebody needed a snack, and they interrupted and it was embarrassing, and now people are going to take from that I'm not committed and that I don't know how to manage my home life, and now they're going to assume that if I can't do that, I shouldn't be in this role, and I'm going to be fired, and my kids are going to be starving, and you just go and go and go and go until you're in this terrible situation that you can't get out of. And so much of this is just cutting off that negative thinking before you go fully down that path. And I think that's important about all of these scenarios, is to just try to think about, how can I stop that? How can I go quickly to the growth mindset, or quickly to the long game of grit, or tap into the passion? Can this passion help me fuel this next set of steps that are going to come, especially if they're awkward and uncomfortable? Can I focus on trying to get something meaningful out of them? So a lot of that is just helpful as you think about these situations. And again, there's no, we didn't mean to steer you towards answers in these scenarios, because there are no perfect answers, right? And that's mostly going to be true in scenarios that you experience in real life, right? There is not going to be one perfect thing to do. There's going to be a lot of different things you could do. And part of it is just sort of trusting yourself to navigate through that. If any of the attendees want to say anything, you are certainly welcome to use the raise hand feature, and we can unmute you if there's anything any of you would like to ask or say in connection with any of these scenarios. And then I'll see whether any of the panelists have anything further to add before we move on to the last section of the program. Yes.
Maybe with regards to the possibility that you can get to let go, we realized that we had no other choice than to go working from home for several months with the lockdowns. And we realized that for many people, we realized they were working even better from home than when they were at the firm, because they didn't have to be blocked every 5 seconds with questions that could be answered otherwise. And we've decided, now that we are back to a certain kind of normal, that every person in the team would be allowed to keep, if they want, some days to work from home. We made a meeting last time where basically we managed to make sure there are still some people at the office, but that anyone was allowed to go and take the the time they needed out of the firm, which is something that would have never happened 3 years ago. In the olden days, when you were not at the office, you had to be not working. And I think this was absolutely amazing. And I'm proud of the firm for being able to reflect that way.
Yeah, it's so great. And I think, that is, of course, there was a lot of suffering during this time, and we would never want to minimize that. But certainly, certainly there have been silver linings like this. For me, I live quite far from the office. And so it's been a tremendous gift that I don't have to be in 5 days a week anymore, because I can spend time with my children in a way that I couldn't before. I could work the same amount of hours and then still also have dinner with them. And that has been, a tremendous game changer. And I don't minimize the value of being together either. I mean, there are times where that's the right place to be, and I'm getting tremendous learning and training and development because we're together. But I think there is, more of flexibility is so key here, in that not one size is going to fit all people. And I think that's been a real blessing of this time period, is we've been forced to reconsider all of those assumptions that we made. So I'm going to move quickly now to the very last portion of the program. I think I'll end just about on time, but moving here, we've talked a little bit about this, but I just want to make the point that teams need grit too. So this session has really been about individual grit and growth mindset. So from our perspectives, what can we do to help drive that? But it's tremendously important for the team, if you think of the team as an entity too, to also have grit and operate in a gritty way. There's so many challenges that teams face that call for that. And I think the pandemic is, just as we were saying with sort of flexibility and work schedules, really highlights how important it is that the team be able to bounce back, that the team be able to learn from mistakes, that everybody do that same sort of thing at the group level. And the same is true for mindset. And we've talked about this, and I think Anna and Costanza made some fantastic points on this. The team also needs to operate with a growth mindset orientation, so it's a safe space, and everybody understands we're here to learn. That's what we're doing. This is an apprenticeship profession. We're all learning at all stages of the process, from people and processes that have come ahead of us, and it's really important to approach that with this mindset orientation. So some things that you can do to build your own resilience. We talked about grit and growth mindset, and the most exciting news, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, is that these can be developed. So even if you aren't particularly gritty or growth mindset oriented, you can really amp these traits up. You can sort of turn that dial to become more gritty or more growth mindset oriented. And, I won't go through all of these in the interest of time, but we did touch on a lot of them. So much about it is learning how to navigate through a difficult mistake or getting comfortable with uncertainty. We just talked about that, right? It's so important to be comfortable with that. Really to make sure that you're seeking out feedback from people, right? And rewarding yourself when things go well, right? And also rewarding yourself for effort, right? Because things don't always go well. So don't just say, I'm only going to celebrate when everything goes perfectly. You should celebrate when you work hard, because that effort is the key to advancement ultimately, right? Making sure that you're understanding the mission. And really what we're doing today is sharing success and failure stories, stories where we struggled, stories where we doubted ourselves, stories where we succeeded, just because we want to get rid of that myth that success is easy, right? Achievement and success is very difficult, and it takes a lot. And when you think about bringing this to your teams, again, it's why we wanted to have all these different perspectives on this call today. It's absolutely critical, right? Making sure that your team understands what is happening, why people are doing it, that they are safe. If a mistake is made, they feel that they can learn from that, because that will keep them motivated. And it's also the best thing for the client. It's the best thing for the firm, right? All of that is so important. And again, just being present and really transparent about how all of these traits work and the importance of truly each and every one of them. So I will say, I know we're right at 10:30. I will say that there is a lot more information if you're interested in this topic on the ABA's Grit Project website. Lots of resources. We talked about lots of studies. You can find many of them there. You can also deliver a grit project in your own firm. There are all the materials to do that. So you can easily download them, and there's talking points, and you can just take that to wherever you want to take it. And I am very grateful to the panelists for sharing so openly and candidly. I learned a lot hearing from you, and always love the stories. That's always my favorite part of these programs. So thank you to all of you for joining. And Kadri and Agatha, I don't know if you want to say any final words, but thank you all so much.
Yes, I would like to add two final words. One is thank you very much free, in fact. I would like to say that we will continue this workshop during the annual Congress of AIJA in Zurich in August, and I invite all female lawyers to join. We will have a very practical workshop session. We will see if it will be available also online, but definitely we want to make it an in-person meeting. I hope to see many of you in Zurich.
Thank you, Agatha. Thank you, Milana, and thank you all fellow panelists. It was great, great session. And now I would like to give the floor to Francois for some last words.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Milana. It was absolutely mind-blowing as always. I really want to take the time and energy to thank everybody who's been working on the Women Network, and a special kudos to Jennifer, Paula, and Kadri, and a special kudos to Jennifer, because she really showed both mind, grit, and resilience into bringing such an ambitious project in just 1 year to where we are right now. This year has been pretty impressive. The network is only 1 year old, and I've been pretty impressed with everything that has been done in just 1 year. I really am looking forward to seeing you all in Zurich, and thank you again for all those very interesting approach, and see you very soon.